Welcome back, friends, to another episode of Framing the Hammer. I am your host, Gavin, and I'm the Executive Director of 4A Arts, the American Alliance of Artists and Audiences, where we are trying to connect artists and audiences together to amplify voices so that our society and especially our government will give greater consideration to the arts and creative industry. I'm so honored and excited to have my two English teachers from high school, Katherine and Jim Starkey, who taught me my honors English and my AP English class. And thank you for both being here.
It's good to be here. Our pleasure.
So, could you give our listeners just a brief bio for what you taught and for how long you taught? And then also, I seem to recall you having a rather arts-based beginning of your romance, if you wouldn't mind. If I'm remembering that correctly, there was something along the lines of, as I see your faces, there was something along the lines of one of you said, read these 3 books, and then we go out on a date or something like that. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. I think I'm the one to talk about the books that we had. The thing that happened is we had the same planning period, and we had this time and we got to know each other. And that at one point it was clear we liked each other, and he arrived at my house. At my apartment. I didn't have a house, this tiny little apartment. And he brought Franny and Zooey, Raise High the Roof Beams, Carpenters, and 9 Stories, a bottle of Mum's champagne, and a record album of the band.
Of the band, yeah.
And he walked through the door,
the Brown album.
The Brown album. And he came to the door and he said, I think I'm falling in love with you. However, I can't love a woman who doesn't know this album, who hasn't drunk this champagne, or has read these 3 books. And I sat and I was furious.
I told you I could be a real asshole.
I mean, at first, falling in love is an assignment. It was like, fuck you.
So, that's all right.
But, that was my first reaction. So I went to the first day doing laundry, storming around, not grading papers, which was what I needed to do. And then I finally put on the album, and it was wondrous.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know I had never had a bottle of champagne in my life. And I at least had put it in the fridge, but I had no idea how to open it. And there wasn't YouTube or anything on how to do that. And so I started knocking on doors on the apartment place where I lived. And one guy opened the champagne for me, and he said, can I come down and share it? And I said, no. And went down with my champagne and opened the books, and I didn't sleep that night. It was a Saturday, and I read all of Franny and Zooey, read 9 Stories, and I didn't make it through the other one by Monday morning, and didn't grade a paper. And it was like, going back, I didn't know if I was incredibly angry or manly in love.
Yeah.
And that's where that story is.
I would say those emotions can be awfully closely related, frankly. I could see madly in love and furious being very close on whatever scale they would be measured on.
Well, it had never occurred to me that art was going to be a standard for love.
We kind of talked together and lesson planned together and shared ideas together. And she was the smartest person in the department. And she was also a sucker for poetry, which I was really good at.
Right.
Also.
And we fell in love and got married and stuff.
Also, there was a wonderful night after this where we had gone to a football game, a Green Mountain High School football game. And we ended up, and then we'd gone to the Jefferson 440 and danced. And we ended up at a place off 6th Avenue that's still there, Breakfast Westridge. I don't know the name of the place. But we went in, and It was like 1 a.m. when we got there. And we spent from 1 a.m. till about 6 a.m. arguing over whether Gatsby was great or not.
The character, yes.
And basically, he was wrong and I was right. Gatsby is great. However, I knew that anybody that he would talk to me about Gatsby for 4 hours in the middle of the night was probably somebody that was important.
But if I'll do a quick segue into the hammer thing. Okay?
Please do.
I have no idea where this idea came to me from, but when I was a kid, I lived in Estes Park, and my aunt was the secretary of the superintendent, and I always had this feeling that as soon as you crossed the line and went into a national park, it was like somebody put a frame around the whole thing, and it changed because it made you. I didn't think this when I was a kid, but I do now. That it made you stand back and take an aesthetic distance to the whole thing because it's important. It's framed off, and so I've always thought that framing stuff is a really cool thing to do. And so when we first got married, we would inevitably, when you're first married and you buy a house, you will discover
rent an apartment.
But you will discover there are ugly spots in that place. And we had an ugly spot, which is a thermostat right in the middle of the wall. And so we basically started putting frames around stuff that was ugly, and just thought that was a cool thing to do. And that's kind of where the whole framing thing came from, I believe.
Yeah. That at the house in Wheat Ridge, we had this ugly little strange thing. It was a box that we didn't even know. I think it had fuses or something in it.
Yes, it was a fuse box.
And we put the frame around that. It was a thermostat in another house. And then we finally bought our own house, and we didn't have this ugly thing to frame. But I will say we went without furniture and nothing on the walls. And we bought the house because of the walls.
Our current house, yeah.
Our current house. It had huge walls to put paintings on. And we knew that someday we would do that. And we had intermediate things that went on in between. But we truly bought our house to be a gallery, a museum. And it is now, and the only pisser is that you haven't come to see it, Gavin.
We'll fix that.
And also, whenever the kids would create something extraordinarily wonderful, we would not just put it on the refrigerator; we would frame it. There was lots of framing in our house, and I'm going to modify what you said about that little exhibit I did. Of course, I modified it over the years, so you might be the first year I did it. But I would always come into the room. I have 3 nails on my hands, and the frame would be over to the side, and a hammer. And I would, you're right, silently hammer these nails in, and put the hammer rakishly on a tilt, And then I would go over and get the frame, and say, Look what happens to the hammer when I do this. And I put the frame over it. And I usually elicited gasps from people. But it was just like a teacher trick to start a discussion. And it worked really, really well.
Yeah. It really did work very well. I certainly remember it. So we've already established your commitment to art. I mean, just art in all forms. And I guess my first question I'm so curious to know is, was this unique to the two of you, and did it inform both of your teaching or styles, or is this, frankly, I don't know what the training is to become an English teacher in high school. Do you, when you went to teachers to UNC, was it? One of you went to CSU.
Yeah. I went to CSU, Jim went to Regis. And no, this was not part of our training. It is what we learned through our individual reading.
But I don't think it's unique to us.
I mean,
well, if you're teaching language arts, it's hard not to teach art.
Well, and for instance, if you're getting at the high levels of literature, books need mythology. They need philosophy. Yeah. They need sociology. They need art. There are references to all of these things. And what I am the most proud of is of teaching kids a vocabulary for talking about philosophy, sociology, mythology, art.
Yes.
And so when I introduced art, I'm showing a pretty grainy version of Sunday in the Park with John.
Yes, I remember it well.
But that's the language, order, composition, tension. This is the language I taught you so that you could look at a play, a novel, a painting, with a language to look at it in terms of art, which is followed by Sunday in the, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Yes.
And you can't, and I would bring in objects that you would debate, and then Jim would take all of that levels higher. All I did was provide a vocabulary. And I truly believe that once you have a lexicon about philosophy, sociology, mythology, art, you can talk about literature with some sort of expertise. And we sent those of you who went through our program off to college with a lexicon that the vast majority of people didn't have. And it also included sentence crafting, structuring an essay. I mean, it was far beyond just those things.
But we were lucky. We had our own little curricular kingdom up there.
Yes.
Nobody bothered. And one of the things that I did, I don't think when you were in AP I did, but at the beginning of AP, when I got into the poetry part of AP, and trying to teach them how to write one-pagers on poems and stuff like that, I would go down to the Denver Art Museum to listen to the tape of describing how, because if you dissect a painting, you dissect it basically the same way you dissect a short story or a poem or a novel, and that just served as a really good model of how to write one-pagers,
I do that with my own kids constantly, who, of course, I think are geniuses, but I also, without trying to push them in directions that they shouldn't go or that just I want them to go, you always want to just foster more, and everything becomes a lesson for me. My children constantly say to me, not everything has to be learned, Daddy. Right. Not everything has to be a lesson all the time. Not everything has to be a history lecture or an art lecture.
I have an answer to that. It's called the dirty old man theory of learning.
Which is?
You don't have to master this, but I'm going to expose you. Yeah. But, like we got into conflicts with younger teachers at Green Mountain because we did Hamlet in 2.5 weeks. And we had before and after school sessions, and this is with sophomores. And later on, they were doing 6 weeks on Hamlet. And it was like, they don't need to master Hamlet in high school. This is the dirty old man theory of learning. They need to be exposed.
Yeah. I love that.
They'll master Hamlet in college if this is where they're going. And so this is when you talk to your kids, let them understand that, you don't have to know everything about this, but frankly, exposure is a very good thing and it makes your brain cells grow. And for instance, after we left the sophomore program, they were spending 8 weeks on Hamlet, where we were spending 2.5 weeks. And they were looking for mastery, and we were looking for exposure.
And in high school, mastery is stupid.
and truly, it is.
I am curious, when was there a moment that did it take years to craft the way you taught essentially in tandem, or did you have an artistic moment that said, wait a minute, this is what we should be doing, and you changed your whole pedagogy in your approach?
This would be a really politically uncool thing to say right now, but when we were teaching sophomore language arts, what we were really doing was teaching 15-year-old kids how to think.
Yeah,
that was our curriculum.
Yeah, and it was,
and to get to that, of course, you analyze art. Sometimes you analyze all kinds of things, but mostly we taught them how to think, which many parents would say that's values clarification. Communist stuff like that. Yeah. So we got in big trouble for that.
Yeah, like the graded large group discussions and sophomores were in trouble, but we taught literal, inferential, and critical thinking,
and that's all about art.
And that was a reduction of Maslow's levels to what we thought was appropriate. And then we taught subjective labels and objective details.
And that's all about art.
And that's from two professors from Colorado University whose name,
Barbara and Jane Stanford.
Yeah, and that was a huge thing.
And the other big book was Writing to be Read.
Yes, Writing to be Read. It was about free writing.
But what basically happened is she and I taught each other how to teach for those years.
We had about three years where we were really learning from each other. We were going to school. We were both taking graduate classes off and on in there and learning things from that. And
being really romantic at the same time.
And also, my grandmother was a phenomenal artist, and she was there'll be a museum show of her in Kansas at the University of Kansas.
Yeah. Wow.
In the coming future, and so
she's
she's a big deal, and so art. I had wanted to major in art, and my father had forbid it because his mother had been a starving artist. And so being a starving English major was okay, but not a starving art major was okay. And my mother and I spent a lifetime trying to recover my grandmother's paintings, and we have a great number of them.
Yes, we do.
And we're lucky that we have what we have. And I don't know when the show will be, but it'll be coming on. So I have this background, and I would take my grandmother, this great artist who had given it all up at a time when she was late in her life, up into the mountains to do pastels, do drawings. And so I have that background. And his mother, who had no education, but had a son who was a great artist. Her twin was a great artist. Loved art passionately.
The coolest thing we have in our house, in my opinion, is when her grandmother went to the New York Institute of Art, right?
Yes.
And she was there at the same time that
Cahill Gibran.
Who?
Cahill Gibran.
Yeah, but she and Cahill Gibran were classmates, and also she knew Martha Graham.
That reminds me, two more questions about your kids, students that you had. Did you have any? Did you have the tools or specific strategies in breaking through to kids who just weren't interested in art, or did you just kind of plow past them and pull them along for the ride and they learned what they learned? Or did you try to really get into kids' brains for those who weren't interested?
Every single class, Jim and I did from ninth. We both taught ninth graders, where we did an amazing like Western Southwestern unit. And I mean, basically everything was designed to hit to kids at all levels. And basically, if there was a work that just wasn't getting through to somebody, you would take the kid aside and say, you know, this is coming up, this will hit you. But there truly was such a variety in what we did that we knew a kid could fall out here or there.
And also, it's not like we were teaching classes in aesthetics or anything like that. It wasn't really being that heavy. Like for some people, like you perhaps, it really hit home. And like when you saw the hammer on the wall, you went, "Whoa, that's so fucking cool!" But when other people saw the hammer on the wall, they said, "What is this guy talking about now?" And it didn't make any difference at all. It was still okay. Yeah. So I didn't really. Maybe this is an unprofessional thing to say, but I didn't worry a whole lot about the kids who were not infatuated by art. Yeah. Because there were other things to be infatuated
You have 150 kids a day. We hit a huge proportion.
Yes, we did.
Every day.
Yeah.
And basically, when you got to the AP creative, right, those high-level classes, it was... You had to be, and there were those kids there, but you had to be a highly pragmatic, grade-grubbing kid to not appreciate what we were doing at that point.
One of the greatest, in my humble opinion, one of the greatest comments I ever made, I was being the Rampage sponsor. And this doesn't just apply to Rampage, it applies to everything. But Trisha Elias, my sports editor, wonderful kid, said, and she said, I said, "Trisha, your job is to put this paper out." And she said, "Well, Mr. Starkey, what's your job?" "My job is to give you the illusion that this is fun." And that's what a teacher does. That's what a teacher does.
As a child, what piece of art most inspired you when you think, what comes to mind?
A cover of a book that my grandmother gave me of a girl playing at the piano. And I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and I can't tell you the name of the book or everything, but it was the cover of the book that was beautiful.
I came from a very, very Catholic religious family. I was going to become a priest until I got out of high school. And so the Portrait of the Sacred Heart's the most inspiring thing to me. It's incredibly grisly and awful, but that's what I was. And also my mother's twin brother did a beautiful watercolor of a barn. And by the time I got to be 6th, 7th grade, I could appreciate as being spectacular. But before then, it was the Sacred Heart.
Fabulous. And then finally, what bit of art have you experienced that was most wonderful for you?
There's a barn in our bedroom that is probably on a daily basis the most important thing, painting to me. But in a lifetime, and it's not new, and I can't help it, but the Sunday at the park at Le Grand Jatte is a guiding principle to me. And I've not found any painting that has done more for me than that. And I'm looking all the time. And you saw us at MoMA, and I wept over other things. You haven't seen me in front of that painting.
Right.
I have 2 quick answers. My first answer, since she brought up MoMA, is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon at MoMA, which I think is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I'm starting to cry just thinking about it. And the other thing is my granddaughter Willa in 4th grade did a magnificent painting of a face with these 2 beautiful eyes.
Yes.
And it just,
as
you can tell, I'm moved by it. Yeah. So those are the 2 things.
Yeah.
We're so lucky when we can simplify things and bring it down to children and art. I so took lessons from you about the things most important in life are children and art. And when we're able to see life through a child's eyes and get in contact with our inner children, art just becomes easier and fluid and transitory, and it just takes us on journeys, and it all so much of that in my life comes back to the two of you. So thank you to the two of you for taking.
We had a good time.
Thank you.
You made us feel important.
I love your hammer.
Yes.
Thank you.